Marvel Comics had a teaser promo saying he is back. It had like black and red and white lettering. It's kind of oozing. It was clearly Knull, but I had a lot of people kind of reach out to me like, hey, Donny Cates is returning to Marvel Comics. They're going to announce it on June 16th, 616. No, Marvel 616. They're trying to do the May the 4th type thing, I guess, with Marvel Comics. And I said, hey, hold up there. That's probably just Knull. I don't think Donny Cates himself is returning because I don't think he's quite frankly welcome back at Marvel Comics at this point. Unfortunately, I do think Marvel could use them. I actually got my hands on some of the actual distribution numbers, not sales to customers, but distribution to comic book retailers for Marvel. And they are very, very frightening. We won't get into that here. I'll have another video on that here in another day or two. But despite the malaise that they continue to go through and the lack of sales at Marvel Comics and the lack of enthusiasm, Donny Cates, I don't think, is ready to come back. But Knull is coming back. Is that really exciting news to anybody? It doesn't really get my juices flowing, but I imagine some people out there like, yes, it's finally Knull. But I think far more people were excited about the potential return of Donny Cates to comic books. And one of the reasons that I didn't think this was happening, and it's a small anecdote, and I will freely admit I wasn't at the table hearing everything that was being said, but Donny was in Ben Expo Dallas, or at Ben Expo Dallas, I guess is a better way of saying that, more grammatically correct. And he was basically mostly a no-show on that Saturday. He was supposed to be there. His handlers were there for hours. He didn't arrive. He finally does show up and started signing some autographs. And admittedly, no doubt about it, based on what I saw, there's still a lot of interest amongst fans for Donny Cates. But after a short amount of time, I think less than an hour, he excused himself and then never returned. And you could see the people that were manning the booth were visibly not happy about the fact that he didn't come back. He was apparently supposed to. At least that was my impression from seeing it, from a few feet away. And I do know for a fact that there were 4 to 5 Marvel Comics editors there that probably saw what happened. I imagine it was talked about amongst the other comic book pros. If I noticed it, they definitely did. Although I will admit freely, I believe he showed up and filled most, if not all of his commitments on the following Sunday. So at least he did do some of the stuff. But I don't believe there's a lot of faith in Donny Cates being reliable for Marvel Comics or even DC Comics, which we'll kind of get into. Let's hit the Knull stuff, and then we'll get into Donny and what he's actually been up to. Knull is set to make a dramatic return in Venom 250, hitting shelves this October. The God of Symbiotes will go head-to-head with the current Venom host, Mary Jane Watson, who's been stepping into her role as a reluctant hero in the ongoing all-new Venom series. But this milestone issue isn't just about their showdown. It also marks the end of the all-new Venom series, with legacy numbering returning as Venom 251 the following issue. Knull, who first debuted in Donny Cates and Ryan Stegman's 2018 Venom run and recently made his live-action debut in Venom: The Last Dance, has been resurrected and is out for revenge after being defeated by Eddie Brock. This sets the stage for a major symbiote saga, and fans are eager to see if Mary Jane can hold her own against a cosmic threat like Knull. I think that is up for debate. I know that I'm not all that eager to see Mary Jane as Venom continue on at all, and certainly not going toe-to-toe with the God of Symbiotes. It's kind of ridiculous. Mary Jane versus Knull, who would win? What a ridiculous predicament Marvel Comics have put themselves in by making Mary Jane the Venom. I think is a joke. It feels like it's supposed to be a joke. That's the only redeeming quality about the Al Ewing series, I believe, with Carlos Gomez on art, is that you do get to see Dylan destroy Paul time and time again, every single issue. It's my favorite bad comic book out right now, just for the Dylan stuff, but it's not a good series, and Al Ewing is writing the Knull story. I don't think anybody said, if there's one guy I want to see bring Knull back into the fold, it's Al Ewing. That would not be a choice for me, let alone my first choice. I would have personally gone probably with a Ben Percy or a Phil Kennedy Johnson, writers that are much more in line with horror-type atmosphere, horror-type comic books. Frank Thierry comes to mind as somebody that works with Marvel that would have been better suited for a story like this. Tim Seeley would have been better suited for a story like this. So Al Ewing returning Knull to the fold, even if there is a large amount of interest in Knull returning to Marvel Comics, which I don't know that there is, was probably the wrong choice, at least in my opinion. There's also a backup story, I guess, from Charles Soule, who's doing a pretty darn good job on Eddie Brock Carnage. Surprisingly, another marriage that I wouldn't want to have seen, but he's kind of making it work. But he's getting Carlos Gomez on his comic book, which makes much more sense from what Al Ewing is getting on this Knull book. The Knull book is getting Terry Dodson, who's a legend, and he is a great artist, no doubt about it. But he does more like cheesecake covers, and he doesn't really do horror art. Whereas Carlos Gomez certainly would have been much more apt to make Knull look like this enormous, cosmic threat, symbiote god type of thing. So I do think they missed the mark on that. I don't think people are craving the return of Knull himself. I think people are craving the return of Donny Cates bringing back Knull. And I think bringing back Knull without Donny Cates probably doesn't work. I think it's like going over to DC and bringing back the Batman Who Laughs, but then you put Gail Simone on it or something like that. Something that would get nobody excited for the character. You need to bring him back with Scott Snyder. You need to bring Knull back, I think, with Donny Cates personally to really make the character click and feel exciting again. Now, Donny has been a little bit busy talking about Marvel Comics. This is probably another red flag that he was not going to be returning to Marvel anytime soon. He's actually kind of been taking shots at them from the sideline, and I kind of agree with them, but he's not exactly ingratiating himself to Marvel Comics these days. Knull's return isn't the only thing heating up the conversation. His creator, Donny Cates, has recently taken public shots at Marvel over how they've been handling Spider-Man. Cates has been critical of the company's refusal to let Peter Parker grow up, arguing that keeping him trapped in a perpetual state of adolescence is holding the character back. He's pointed to bold moves like the Captain America Hydra storyline and asked, why can't Peter experience real evolution? Why can't he get married, be a father, move forward in his life, especially after everything he's been through, from Gwen Stacy's death to his divorce? It's a frustration he's voiced before, including during pitches for Ultimate Spider-Man, and it highlights an ongoing tension between creator vision and Marvel's editorial direction. Interesting enough, he mentions the divorce of Spider-Man. To my knowledge, Spider-Man's never been divorced. Now, he did have his marriage taken away, but I don't think that was a divorce. That was a demonic intervention, I guess, on the part of Mephisto, kind of removing it from the history of Marvel Comics and kind of taking that away from him. But I don't think technically he was divorced. But that talk might kind of lead into some other things that are going on with Donny and why he's probably not returning to Marvel. But I don't think that Tom Brevoort and C.B. Cebulski and Dan Buckley are just going to be welcoming Donny Cates back with open arms as he's sitting on the sidelines taking very critical pot shots at their Spider-Man character, the flagship character that most people agree with Donny Cates, that it is very stagnated. He is in a state of arrested development where he's not really allowed to evolve or change over time. I wouldn't do Hydra Spider-Man or whatever it is that Donny Cates was saying there with like the Hydra cap evolution of the character. I don't think that's something we should try to emulate or redo with another character, where you do something so massively out of character that it actually drives fans away and turns them off, i.e. One More Day all over again, Spider-Man making a deal with the devil, a Faustian deal. Makes no sense for the character, never made sense for the character, and people have been pissed off for like 30 years over it. People are still pissed off about Hydra Cap, but I get the sentiment. Doing something big, bold, earth-shattering with the character, letting him do something besides just be a teenager perpetually is what Spider-Man needs. But another clear indication that there is something standing between Donny Cates and Marvel Comics these days. If he was a writer in good standing and they were about to hire him, he wouldn't be taking pot shots at the company. Comic book creators just don't do that. They can't afford to do that because there just aren't enough opportunities out there. But I do think Donny has burnt some bridges with Marvel Comics. Now, he has started to go and address some of the issues that drove him away from comic books for several years. I will kind of give a rundown on that and my thoughts on it. But it is far more complicated, and I'm not going to get into all the details because those are his details to give. But it is far more complicated than he's letting on what happened, a couple of years ago and why he hasn't been back with the company. Part of why Cates disappeared from the spotlight is that he's been through a brutal few years. In 2023, he was in a severe car accident that caused serious brain trauma and temporary amnesia, wiping out 6 months of memory and forcing him to walk away from major books like Thor and Hulk. That, combined with the divorce and personal struggles, meant Cates had to hit pause and focus on recovery. He even stepped away from rumored projects at DC, but now he's gearing up for a comeback. New work is slated for release this summer, and fans are already buzzing about what this fan favorite writer might deliver next. And there is a big article, or was a big article, on the Popverse. I just had the headline up there. I would suggest you go read it and hear it from his side of the... I would suggest you go check it out for yourself and hear his side of the story and things from his perspective, because they're certainly different than mine. But I don't believe that rumored summer project that he had announced a few months back is ever going to come to fruition. We've already gotten solicitations out through August. No Donny Cates book in there. As far as I know, and this is what I was told, it was a DC project. It was in the Absolute Universe, working for Scott Snyder. But DC Comics had set certain benchmarks that he had to achieve for them to really move forward with the project. He initially went along with whatever the plan was, which I'm not going to get into because that's his business. But he didn't complete it, and he didn't hit the benchmarks, and that project is not coming out. Will he have other projects, or will that one finally make it to shelves? Hopefully so. I do think Scott, it appears just from my vantage point, and I am not in that inner circle whatsoever, from what I know and from what I've been told, that Scott Snyder has been very supportive of Donny, wants to get him back into comic books, wants to help Donny get his life back in order and get his career back in order. And I think Scott has been very patient and will continue to be patient with Donny Cates. So we might see that project eventually. It's not going to happen this summer. Perhaps he'll have some type of creator-owned work. I don't believe it will be with Marvel. Even if you go read that article from Popverse, which he's pretty honest about what's going on there, he leaves out a ton of information that actually happened because, yes, he did have the car accident, but there's another accident in there. For some reason, he keeps saying he wasn't in a boat wreck. He was in a boat wreck. There's public record about that. But there's a lot of other stuff that went along with it. There were other arrests that happened along the way. He clearly was having problems. Marvel knew about it. There were other problems along the way that came up there, and he did screw Marvel over. And at some point, he's going to have to prove to them, maybe by working with DC or doing something on the indie scene, that he can be reliable once again, because I do think Tom Brevoort would be desperate to bring somebody like a Donny Cates back into the fold. Tom Brevoort had certainly elevated him and given him lots of opportunities while he was the Avengers group editor and all that kind of stuff, and really elevated Donny Cates along the way, including screwing over Jim Starlin for Donny Cates, basically with his Thanos book and all that stuff. And I believe me, if Tom Brevoort wanted to change the perception and the conversation around his X-Men line, bringing Donny Cates on board for an X-Men or an Uncanny X-Men or a Wolverine book would go a long way to it. But I just don't think anybody is willing to trust him with all the issues that he did have. He mentions that he did have a divorce. That definitely had a major impact on Donny that was very negative, which I do not begrudge him that at all. If I was going through something like that, I think I would also have a bit of a breakdown, which he apparently did have. Now, as far as did he really lose his memory and suffer amnesia? I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I find that very, very convenient with the amount of stuff that he's leaving out within that story and the amount of stuff that he was really screwing up along the way. Kind of convenient that he gets amnesia, but he did have a brain injury. So it is not out of the realm of possibility that he also suffered some type of temporary amnesia and really did have to learn to tie his shoes again and stuff like that. I'm not really sure. I'm not a doctor, but I am rooting for Donny Cates. Even with all the stuff that happened, he never screwed me over. You know, he screwed Ryan Otley over. He screwed Marvel Comics over. He screwed Nick Klein over, who had Torn Grunbeck try to, finish up his Thor run, because there were issues happening well before this car accident that were making him very unreliable. He screwed Marvel Comics over. He didn't screw me over as a customer. I liked what he was doing in Thor. I wasn't so enamored what he did with Hulk, but I like his Thanos story, despite Jim Starlin being screwed over in the process. I like what he did with Venom. I like King in Black. I like a lot of that stuff. So I would love to see Donny Cates return to Marvel Comics. I would love to see Donny Cates return to DC Comics, and I'm 100% rooting for him. But until he gets his house in order and really starts proving that he can once again be considered a reliable creator that you can give something major to and hand it to him, and he's not really going to screw it up with his self-sabotaging kind of tendencies that he has, I just don't see him working at Marvel. I see him working at DC way before then, because he does have a major ally in Scott Snyder, who I do believe definitely wants to see Donny get his life back and get his career back and get things back in order. And is definitely, from what I can tell and from what I've seen and what I've been told, is somebody that's really, really trying to help him out in the long run. So there you go. We didn't see Donny Cates return. It was Return of Knull. He is taking some pot shots at Marvel Comics. I don't see him returning there anytime soon. And he's got some major issues that he's still working on to this day. If you appreciate this kind of coverage of comic books, honesty that you really won't get anywhere else but here on Think Critical YouTube, and you would like to support our mission of highlighting comic books, whether it be comic books themselves, movies, television, the great stuff, the bad stuff, all the stuff in between, and you'd like to become part of the Thinking Critical family, there's one place to do that. That is Thinking Critical Patreon. There's a link in the video description. There's a button right here, and we got plenty of awesome podcasts waiting for you.